So welcome to our third Python programming seminar. A couple of news and updates before we start with the main topic on it. So news on the hardware side, we are just turning on and getting ready into production. How many are they? 70? 70 new nodes with 16 cores each. Ton of memory on them. So now there are a lot of them that have 256 gigabytes of memory. So our pool on big mem nodes is going to increase, which is a good news for the ones of you that needs a lot of memory. And they are in production. They have been put in production yesterday or 2 days ago. So they're ready and available to use. Other news, on the big data side, Josh started creating this blog that you can see over here, which focuses on how to do some big data at ACCRE. So you have, well, a welcome, an introduction on our big data cluster that we are setting up, and also how to use Spark on our existing high-performance computing cluster. So you don't need to use, in the environment that you're already familiar with, you can simply run Spark jobs. And in here, Josh put a ton of information to, if I can scroll it, from how to set up the Slurm script to what kind of environment variables you need, and so on. Okay, so that said, I think this is all for the news today. The GPUs, yeah, we are gonna have 10 new nodes coming in the next month. There will be 10 nodes, each with 4 Titan X, but under the Pascal family. So it will be the next generation. Each node will have 8 cores and 228 gigs of memory. So all of them will be interconnected again as the current Maxwell partition with our low latency, high speed Rocky network. So if you use GPUs with MPI, you can use GPUs across multiple nodes without losing much. And that's it, I think, for the news, because everything else is still on a very dev. So let's scroll over here. Good. Okay. Okay. So back to the theme of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce you Stephen Damon, that work at Vanderbilt Medical Center in the group of Bennett Landman. His work focuses mainly on image analysis and with specifics on MRI imaging. And today he will introduce you how to use DAX on our cluster. All yours.
Thank you. All right, thanks for the introduction. Like you said, I work in the Massey lab with Bennett Landman. I've been there for about 4 years, and I've been using ACCRE for about the same amount of time. So let's hop right into it. Maybe? That works. All right, so what's the big idea here? So Vanderbilt collects a lot of data, right? There's the VUIS, there's the hospital, there's lots of data coming in, and we'd like to do some sort of processing on it. So in this case, we've chosen a brain here that we're splitting out into pieces, but we want to try to get that information and say, what can we do with this? What can we say about the size of someone's hippocampus, their temporal lobes? Is that information indicative of disease progression or prognosis, or is there anything interesting that we can gain from it? And with that, we want to figure out what's the optimal system that we can use to do this in. Obviously, we're going to need some high-performance computing cluster to be able to run all the jobs that we have, but how do we manage all of this data, and what does that actual process flow look like? So one of the things that we're trying to break the habit of, which is what Bennett refers to the, quote, postdoc problem, is a new project comes in, a PI will have a postdoc write the algorithm up, and then they'll run it, and then they'll leave. So that information is lost when the postdoc leaves, and it's really hard to translate that to new studies, new projects, and just kind of translate it across. So what we've done is we've developed a system that captures the algorithm as the postdoc had written it, or anyone else, staff members, graduate students, anything like that, captures it exactly how it's been run, defines the inputs and outputs, and then you can just run it into perpetuity. So trying to get around the problem of, well, it ran on my computer, or here's some other ones that we get all the time. It doesn't work. That one's pretty common. I'm sure, ACCRE, you guys get a lot of those on your help desk tickets, or the server died, another common one. We're trying to get away from all these reasons why you can kind of fudge your way out of why did your stuff actually not run. I can't find all the code, and the new data aren't supported. So, common things here. So our solution is to store all the code in running form so that it's automatically applied to the new data and can be rerun on old data. Through this, bugs get found, which is great. You know, we get a new data set, we realize that the field of view is different, maybe we need to update the registration, who knows. There's a whole host of interesting things that happen. Maybe all the data that you get was supposed to be CT and someone sent you a bunch of MR data. There's tons of interesting stuff that happens in image processing. So we use those bugs to refine what we have and fix it, make it better, and harden it a little bit. So alongside of this, we want to break the cycle of starting over. There's so much work that's been done already. So we want to get out of, well, this platform doesn't exactly fit my needs, so I'm just going to rewrite my whole own one. That's not what we want to do. We want to use the open source software that we have. There's plenty of great applications out there for image processing especially. So we want to wrap up all of those processing utilities into some generic interface that we can use to process data. So what we've chosen for our bioinformatics platform is XNAT. I'll go into that briefly in a couple slides about what it is, what it looks like. But basically, you can think of it as a giant hard drive. We use it to store all of our data logically so we can access it. It's stored, backed up, all of that good stuff. With XNAT, we can feed in external programs. People can upload data through the external web browser or a computer. External file systems, it's got a DICOM receiver, so if anyone does medical imaging data, you're probably familiar with DICOM, but it's got a built-in DICOM receiver, so you can send all of that data no problem. And even external XNATs. We've developed tools that you can sync XNATs back and forth, and we've done that with several sites. So with all these contributing sites, we want to be able to do some QA on the data. And in our case, QA is actually running a first-level analysis on the data. Not just looking at the raw data and saying, it looks okay, but some quantifiable way to say, this data ran, it is good, it's okay, it's bad, or anything in between. In our case, all of our data is de-identified. You can run an XNAT with PHI data, but in terms of just security, we felt it was safest just to run a fully de-identified system. All that data goes into XNAT, and we have DAX, which is our processing engine. It's distributed automation for XNAT. It runs on the nodes on ACCRE, and it's been running there for about 4 or 5 years now. And then once all that data has been run on ACCRE, we want to store it back in XNAT. So we've got a repository of users. Users can log in. They can create projects. They can store all the data they want there. There's essentially unlimited space, so there's plenty of rooms for new projects if anyone's interested. There's tons of command line tools that we developed to download your data, to upload your data. If you don't want to use a DICOM receiver, or if you have Nifty data or PAREC, there are other ways to get that data in there. And then there's a really well fleshed out API. It's a REST API for XNAT, so we use that heavily in this DAX piece. So the shared infrastructure that we have enables shared expertise. So we've got a large group that meets every single Friday, and we've got, I don't know, there's probably about 12, 15 members there. There's usually a little bit more than that, but we've got people from all different backgrounds. We've got psych people, we've got neuroimaging people, we've got physicists that come. So it's just a little bit of everybody who comes in and gets to share knowledge, and we're using this shared platform to capture all of that knowledge. So the way that our lab in particular works is engineers are focused on the technical issues. So how to run the jobs. Is there a faster way that we can launch jobs? Can we make our queue a little better so we don't blow up 8,000 jobs again? Are there things that we can do to just enable this whole system to run faster? Well, the scientists, so grad students, postdocs, faculty, high school students even, we've had some in our lab, focus on the open questions of what jobs to run. So what's the scientific hypothesis that you want to run? What do you want to test? What are you actually going to do on the grid? That's left to these scientists. So let's give you a little bit of background on our XNAT instance, and then we'll go into some pictures of what XNAT actually is and what it looks like. Last we checked, we have about 280 projects in there, a little bit over 37,000 subjects, 65,000 sessions, and 245,000 assessors. So a subject is a person in XNAT terminology. A session is a single event of going inside and outside of the scanner. So if you go into the hospital, you get your CT exam, they pull you out, then they put you into the PET CT system. They probably messed up doing that, but those would be two separate sessions. So this supports longitudinal studies and all of that good stuff that everyone's interested in. And assessors is XNAT's term for processing pipeline. So we've run 245,000 different jobs. We've actually run a lot more than that because some have failed. But this is completed assessors that we've run through ACCRE in this DAX system. Some of the projects that we have loaded into here are BLSA, ADNI, so two pretty popular ones, Abide, FCON 1000, and we do have the Human Connectome project as well. It's not loaded into XNAT, but it's online and ready to go. The actual XNAT system has about 200 terabytes of online storage, and we run a Hyper-V cluster with dual front ends. So one of the front ends is reserved just to host all the REST requests, which has more memory than the other front end, which is just users. So the second front end just gets totally backed up with REST requests, and that's fine because it's not hampering down the user experience. We have a DCM Frichet PAX that sits between XNAT and two of the 3T scanners, the 117 magnet and the OCT system, and that data automatically forwards right from the PAX into XNAT. So essentially in real time, you're getting new data right into the XNAT system that's ready to be processed. Cool, so who cares? What does XNAT actually look like? People like to see pictures, right? So when you log into XNAT, here's what you see. You've got a pretty simple interface. There's nothing super robust about this, but it works pretty well for what we've been doing. There's projects, and project is, you can think of that just like your study. So you got an R21 grant, you got an R01 grant, maybe you create a new project for it. Maybe you split up the project two ways. You have your controls and your patients separated. Whatever you want to do is totally fine in XNAT, and we have no limits on what people do with that. Inside of projects are subjects, and then you can see this up here, 229415 is the subject, and then we're inside of an MR session. So this is kind of where the meat of everything happens in XNAT. All of the scans that were required are listed under the Scans tab. You can set usability to anything that you want, but it'll automatically red light to unusable. So text changes to red, questionable is yellow, and usable is green. So you have a quick way of QCing your entire project and saying, what's the status of my project? Have my RAs or staff members gone through and QA'd all of the data like they were supposed to? You can run a quick command line tool and it'll let you know. The other big part is processing, and this is the assessors that I was talking about previously. So this is an example of what a session will normally look like. We've got tons of different stuff that we've run here. I'll get into some of that in a little bit later, but just to kind of show you what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward web interface. It's not too complicated to use. Bennett can use it. He's my PI, so it's PI proof. So that's always handy. If he can navigate his way around it, we're doing pretty well. So what is this DAX system? How does it actually work? So we've got ACCRE, we've got VUIS, we've got XNAT, the Medical Center, and REDCap. There's all these things that we want to link together to do some high-performance image processing and sync the results back into REDCap and have them stored in the study level. So we installed DAX on a gateway. We've got several custom gateways. It's an open source Python package. There's a little bit of Java in there, but it's mostly all Python. We install that at the user level. A REST request will be made from DAX, and it'll say, hey, XNAT, do I need to do anything? If anything needs to be done, awesome, then we continue on. If it doesn't, then it ends there and the process finishes out. Then let's assume now that we do have a task that we need to accomplish. That data will get downloaded to Scratch somewhere, or it will be copied straight onto the node as soon as the process starts. ACCRE tickles a little bit and the jobs run. process images go back to Scratch and then back through the gateway, through the REST API, and back into XNAT. Local workstations can download these process data results as well, so it's not limited to just XNAT. You can download these through command line. You can access it through the web interface if you really like clicking. There are plenty of ways to get through your data. And then also, RedCap has a REST API as well, and we send process results back. So if anyone here's run FreeSurfer, anyone run FreeSurfer before? FreeSurfer, okay, one person, so bad example. FreeSurfer spits out a ton of numerical data, several thousand fields that you can capture. So all those results are automatically fed back into RedCap after the processing's been done, so you don't have to worry about aggregating those yourself. So it's a pretty slick system in terms of end-to-end processing. Some investigators just like going to RedCap, doing all their QC on their data and saying, I'm cutting off movement greater than 3 millimeters. And you got all that information. You can QC that way. Or you can download PDFs, and you can look through those PDFs and say, hey, does my data look good? And there's lots of different levels of QC that you can do here. And then also you can take your stats and then download them onto the local workstation. This is probably not viewable in the back, but this is in a nutshell what I just talked about, but it's how the DAX system actually runs. So we have several statuses that we set on XNAT. Red here is end of the line. Green is it ran to completion, and yellow is pending on something. So basically a new task comes up when DAX runs, and it says, hey, am I ever going to run? And if the task should run, then it'll go down to the job running piece. Once the job's running, it'll check the inputs. Let's say you need to download a T1 weighted image and you need some software paths. It's going to check all that stuff first and say, do I have all of my requirements before I can run the job so the job doesn't just die out. After that, the job is going to be running. We have a poller that runs every single hour to see if the job is still running. And then if it's not, it alerts us on failure as well as getting the automated ACCRE emails. And then that job failed status would be uploaded back to XNAT. If the job didn't fail, then the job is assumed to have completed normally. Exit codes are checked, and then the uploaded data is sent back to XNAT, and you get the status of complete. One of the really cool things about XNAT is it's an extensible data source, and it's based on XSDs, so you can make custom data types. In our case, we have this generic processing data type that we stored, where we store the processing status, the type of process that was run. We'll get into some of the process types shortly. The version that was run, which is super important to make sure that the same version runs across an entire study. Your software dependencies haven't changed. Especially for FreeSurfer, this is big when they make lots of under-the-hood changes. We log the job ID, wall time used, when the job started, memory used, and the job node that it ran on. So if it ends up failing, we can still go back to that machine and grab the results and say, you know, what happened here? Why did we fail? So this is just an example on the web interface of what that information looks like. It's nothing too interesting, but you can see we've got the job node, when it started, how much wall time was used, how much memory was used. And this stuff's just nice to have, so when we have grants, we can say, hey, we've run all these years of computing time, or look how much memory we use. Or you know, maybe we use too much over the month and we need to scale back a little bit. Like I said, XNAT is customizable. We've customized the web interface a little bit, so it's now sortable tables here. If you click on the Show Counts over on the Files tab, it'll tell you all the resources that XNAT has for that processing pipeline. And a resource is just a folder with results in it. It'll take all of your data. You can define where your resources go. And you can name them whatever you want. But all it is a folder of resources. The job status is green if it's passed, and if it's failed, it's red. Just another couple customizations that we've made. And everything that we do generates a PDF. So you can see these little PDF links here. And when you click on one, it's going to pull up a picture of the actual PDF that the writer of the Spider processing pipeline has generated. And this is really great because you can quickly look at your data and say, did it work? I don't know. Quickly look there, and then you should have a good idea. So switching gears a little bit, so from the developer perspective, what does DAX actually look like? Well, any command line program can be wrapped into our system, and we run lots of different ones. So we use MATLAB very heavily. Python is used as well, MITK, lots of Java is used as well, which is part of GIST, or GIST is Java-based, the Java Image Science Toolkit. Use FSL a lot, same thing with SPM. Tons of users like to use SPM. We've got a lot of different pipelines that wrap those in. And in our case, we've called the pipeline spiders. I wasn't here when that term was coined, so I'm not sure what the lineage is of it. But so here's some example PDFs that we have. So lots of people run DTI data here, and there's all types of interesting snafus that you can do with DTI. So it's a really good idea to run some QA on your DTI data as soon as you acquire it. So A shows you the rotation and translation information. You've got chi-squared statistics in the bottom right-hand corner across all gradients and volumes. So you can say, did the subject move really bad and one of them got messed up, or are there zippering artifacts, which you can see in this plot? It would just be even odd, essentially. And then you've got your best and worst tensor fit. So you can look at the data really quickly and say, did the data fit well? The B is fMRI QA, so similar type of information here. You have an SNR histogram of the data. You've got rotation and translation information. You got a little map of the median slice of SNR. One of the ones that we run most commonly is C, which is the brain color spider. It does multi-atlas brain segmentation using about 30 atlases, I believe. So we run this along with FreeSurfer. D is it's white matter stamper, and this takes the results of DTI QA, fits into a probabilistic atlas, and says which regions have MD. And I think there's about 40 regions that it's split into. It's a diffusion-based atlas, so it's not as discrete as the ones for the T1 weighted data and the brain color spider. Non-rigid registration to atlas. Lots of people like to register their data, get in the same space for group analysis. Anyone who's seen FreeSurfer before probably recognizes F and hates it, but that is what FreeSurfer looks like when it's done. It does cortical reconstruction and subcortical segmentation, and it does parcellation as well. It's a nice end-to-end pipeline. It's real easy to use. And G is kind of a component of FreeSurfer, but this one's called Tracula, and it does probabilistic tractography and diffusion data. One thing we've been working on really recently is ACCRE. This is a pipeline that does cortical reconstruction and parcellation just like FreeSurfer does. And this uses the multi-atlas data first, and then the surfaces are refined and cut until you get a consistent surface with what you'd expect from the segmentations. Why are these out of order? Oh. So here's another picture of the result here. So we've got the inflated brain views, the outer surface. You've got the inner surface and cortical surfaces of the brain fully reconstructed. You've got a histogram that you can look at quickly. So if you've got a huge spike at 0, then you've got 0 millimeters of cortical thickness. So you're probably dead, or the algorithm totally failed. And the algorithm usually would fail in that case. One of the things that's really cool about DAX is it handles the hierarchy of processing that needs to be done. So anybody here who's done fMRI is probably familiar with doing fMRI first level analysis, fMRI pre-processing, and all of that stuff. The way the system's designed is that you can check for all requirements. So you can check for software, like I mentioned earlier, you can check for scans, but you can also check for other processing streams that need to be completed first. So the entire hierarchy is known, so jobs run when they're supposed to. And most of the time we chain jobs off of the QC status, so when someone actually goes in and manually says, hey, this data is good, then the processing pipelines run. If not, nothing's going to run on your data. With that, we've got standardized tools that we've built to download and upload data for manual intervention. So this is super common in FreeSurfer. It could totally toast out on someone who's got Alzheimer's, hydrocephalus. It usually fails in the ventricles. But we do have some standardized tools that download the data onto the cluster. You can edit it, push it back into XNAT, and then also rerun all of that data back on ACCRE with your updated information and see if your results turn out a little bit better. Switching gears again, one of the cool new things that ACCRE's done recently is started Singularity. So if anyone, has anyone heard of Singularity here? No Singularity user. Okay. So Singularity runs in user space. Docker has a root thread, so there's some threats of user escalation. So what we're doing now is the traditional model is you have your code that sits on top of tools, that sits on top of some programming languages, that sits on top of libraries, and then that sits on top of a host system. Well, one of the things recently that's been an issue for us is FreeSurfer only runs on CentOS 5 or 6, the version that we use. So we need to Dockerize this with the upgrades that are coming down the pipeline for ACCRE for CentOS 7, I believe. So we're working on containerizing or containing all of our everything, including the libraries, the languages, the tools, the code, in a little isolated container. So we can say, hey, this will run exactly the same in 20 years as it did a long time ago. Hopefully something better has come down the line since then, but if you really want to use it, it'll be in an isolated environment that you can do something like that. Yeah?
What is it about the older versions of FreeSurfer that you guys
I don't know. All I saw in the release notes was that they said it was no longer compatible with the previous versions of CentOS. So I'm not sure what they changed, but something not too fun. Like I mentioned before, we've developed a lot of command line tools to use this to interface back and forth with ACCRE and XNAT to make sure the processing is going well. We've got an XNAT upload tool that we wrote. All it takes is a CSV file to upload data into XNAT. Again, PI proof. Bennett can use this. He uses it all the time. He can upload data. So it's a really easy way to get your data into this system. We've got XNAT download, so you can, right, like with upload, you can download the data back down. XNAT check is this kind of pseudo-queryable language that you can get deeper information about a project. So you can say, which jobs of this type failed, or which jobs used this much memory. And it's all through the REST API. I mentioned before XNAT Mirror, which you can use to copy data from one instance to another seamlessly. More recently, we've been developing tools and writing our own custom APIs to use Postgres directly and stripping out the REST API. So we've got XNAT info. This takes about half a second using Postgres. Using the REST API can take anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes, depending on how complex the project is. They're both somewhat linear with project complexity, but obviously going straight to the database is a lot faster here, which shouldn't be too surprising. We've got this thing that we've called assessor util, which generates assessors on the database. Under the fully loaded system, we're seeing about 3 to 4 minutes to generate a single processing pipeline. So that seems fine if you have 1 or 2 sessions coming in during the day, but what happens when you've got a historic data load? You've got an old R01 grant that you now want to load into the system and you want to start processing data with. How are you actually going to get this done in a reasonable amount of time? And this was actually an interesting bottleneck that we found recently in the system. We had to run about 42 days worth of time just to create the assessors. So we ran this in Postgres and it took 2.5 hours. So we are still totally in active development mode on DAX, and hopefully we'll see some speed ups in upload speed as well. The upload tends to get bottlenecked just due to so many things hitting the XNAT instance at the same time. The last thing I want to talk about is the REDCap integration here. We can probably skip this slide, but in case anyone is streaming this, we'll go over what REDCap actually is. It's an online database that's HIPAA compliant. It's used at over 1,800 institutions in 100 countries. It's a data dictionary-driven workflow with API support, which is really fantastic for this work. Like I mentioned FreeSurfer previously, you've got all this data that you need to sync in, and you don't want to sit there typing these numbers. It would just be a bear. You can also sync clinical data in hospital labs, which is experimental at Vanderbilt, but that's also really cool. You can say, hey, this person had this lab done, sync it over. And you can do that now, which is really fantastic. And it's got a ton of support in intro documentation. So let's see, that's there now. Cool. So this is what our manager console looks like. So each one of these little blips is a different type of processing that can run. We used to have this set up so you'd have to code up your definition file, but that got a little bit laborious, and all of us lazy programmers didn't feel like doing that anymore, so we developed an automated way to do it. So you can click on these buttons, you can type in your scan types, you can say how much memory you need, you can say where your library paths are, And then this gets updated every hour, checking for changes. And then that will make your definition file for the project, and it'll launch everything on ACCRE for you. So the way the stats look, similar type database here. Each processing pipeline is its own record in here, and we've got tons of different pipelines. Last I checked, we have over 180 different ones, including different versions. So there's lots of stuff here. There's lots of quantitative results that you can store in with this system. And again, here's one for the parent level resource here. You can see the scan information about who it ran on, what the version was that synced it, what the scan type was, who the person was. These are all anonymized, so it's okay to show this just in case anyone's curious. And then you also get all your quantitative data here. So this is for fMRI QA. You can get all these numbers automatically out, and you can do your QA that way. Or if you want to look at PDFs, you can do that as well. So one last thing, we've got all this information in ACCRE, right? So you've got this hierarchy of project, subject, session, scans, and assessors, with scans and assessors living under this session because they assess the data of that session. And then REDCap, we've got the project settings, REDCap database, and then we also have subject and sessions in other REDCap databases. So there's all these REDCap databases, there's all this processing that's been done, but how do we link XNAT, the stuff that's been done on ACCRE, and REDCap all into one cohesive thing? And that's what this project summary thing is that Brian Boyd wrote. He works in the psychiatric hospital. And he made this project summary that scrapes all of your REDCap databases, all of the process data from ACCRE and XNAT, and it makes this really simple graph of, okay, what's done. So we wanted to make this somewhat PI-proof too, because no one wants to run a command line tool and sit there and wait for it. Bennett doesn't like to wait. I don't like to wait. Is there some automated way where you can just get this email that gets sent to you every single week and says, hey, here's the status of your project. The red ones failed, the green ones passed, yellow is pending on someone to actually QA it. So it's a quick way to keep tabs to see if people are actually keeping up with their QA, so it doesn't slide. You don't end up with any projects or problems in your projects. Also, as part of that, all of the data is dumped out of REDCap that ran on ACCRE, and it gives you a nice graph, and it'll tell you who's outside of the median and all of that good stuff. Just another example here. There's a cut point of what should be considered good or bad. Here's another one for the ASHES Atlas, which does hippocampal subfield segmentation. So you can see the different volumes across every single person in your project. Another bar graph of this is DTI QA, so it's got some of the most important information that you can grab out of it at a quick glance and say, hey, how's my project running? So finally, future directions. Where are we heading with all of this? This is great. It runs on small studies, but how do we make this actually run on a big study? So something like image view. Or how do we make this work in conjunction with impacts? We've been working on this for a couple years now. So impacts reroutes to a VUMC node that's locked in a server room that we cannot get access to ever. And then we have a human intervention step there that strips out all the identifying information, stores it in a database, pushes the anonymized data to ACCRE. ACCRE runs all the processing for us. The data is kicked back to the VUMC node. The identifying information is put back in the file header, and it kicks it back to the research packs. And the idea here is to try to get some sort of process data back to the doctors to say, hey, you know, we're not trying to do your diagnosis at all, but we ran this processing pipeline. Do these numbers help aid in your diagnosis at all? Does it help at all in terms of the treatment plan that you have? Or does it help at all? And we don't know yet. So this is something that we're spinning up now. And another project that we're spinning up is ImageView. This is kind of linked with BioView. I'm sure most people have heard of BioView. But we want to take all the MRI and CT data that's been run in the hospital, and we want to store it in a database. And then as RD or SD studies come in, we want to pull all that imaging data and put it into an XNAT instance. The idea is to anonymize it and then run all the same pipelines that we have on the VUIS side on the hospital side. So Obviously, we've dealt with some of the scale concerns that we've had. We've got ACCRE who can handle all of this burden of processing that our little lab machines cannot do. So we're pretty well suited for this future directions, I think. I'd like to thank all of the collaborators. None of this would be possible without everyone's expertise that we work with. We've got people in special education, psychiatry, neurology, engineering, radiology, surgery, but really a little bit of everything across the board, which is great. Thank the lab, the engineers who work with me, which probably isn't the most fun thing. Thank Bennett, the supervisor, and especially the ACCRE staff for inviting me here to give this talk and dealing with all the crazy tickets that I open. I really appreciate it. And that's all. So if anyone has any questions, happy to entertain those. Yeah.
So where are the bottlenecks, like
in our system?
sophisticated workflow?
Right. So one of the bottlenecks right now is we have about 100 active projects hitting XNAT at the same time, and it's not suited for it. So we're migrating the database backend to one of the servers in ACCRE, actually, Ginkgo. And we ran PG-tune that, tuned the database up, and we dropped by a magnitude of 10. So we saw some great increases.
Are you guys thinking about? Well, I think you're actually doing some development stuff like in Hadoop.
Yeah, we are doing some stuff in Hadoop. The idea is, in the long run, probably 10 years, have Hadoop on the back end of XNAT. Yeah?
Do you know if there's a good way to integrate RedCap and XNAT? So RedCap stuff that's like behaviorally collected or
Right.
Collected for the lab research purposes.
Yeah.
And then integrating that with the automated output of XNAT.
Right. So we have some tools to do that. There's also been some further discussion in the XNAT conference this past year to try to get a grant to integrate XNAT and RedCap so they play a little bit better. But right now it's just totally REST API driven. So you still have to have some matching code on the back end. You still got to code up a little bit, but we do stuff like that, but it's not as slick. Yeah.
Do you have an example, like on one project, and then when we have some kind of input, like image data,
Yeah.
What kind of code we need to prepare to write, prepare the data, and upload the data, and to run the data, and what kind of output we will get from that?
Yeah, I have some examples. Since we're streaming, I can show you after if you want to see how it looks like. Happy to show you though.
Thanks,
Cool.
Steve, again.